and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akeredoluale. The headlines. United States offers to swap Russian arms dealer Victor Bout for basketball star Brittany Griner and Tom Whelan. Norway's UN ambassador says the United Nations Security Council has been unable to agree on a statement welcoming the grain deal. And Ukraine's President Zelensky congratulates citizens on the first day of Ukrainian statehood. We begin this morning with reports of shelling by Russian forces on northeastern cities of Chernihiv and Kharkiv. The mayor of the city says Russian troops attacked the town of Kyiv in the Kharkiv region this morning, adding that there are an unconfirmed number of casualties. Kyiv is still reeling from Monday's attack that collapsed an arts and culture center and killed at least one person. Russian missiles have reportedly struck infrastructure in the Kyiv region as well. Its governor, Oleksiy Kuleba, wrote on his Telegram page that this morning the enemy launched a rocket attack on one of the communities of the Vyshgorod district. In Mykolaiv, the mayor of Ukraine's port city has once again reported powerful explosions in a Telegram post that has become a nearly daily occurrence. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky has said Ukraine will boost its electricity exports to the European Union. In a nightly address, the president explains that the expansion of power trade with Europe would generate foreign currency revenues, increasing cash flow to Ukrainian utilities hit by a drop in domestic electricity since the Russian invasion. On a separate note, Mr. Zelensky also vowed to rebuild the Anatovsky Bridge in the country's Kherson region after it was struck by Ukrainian forces with what a Russian-appointed local administrator said were U.S. supplied high-mobility artillery rocket systems.
Третє. Готуємось до збільшення нашого експорту електрики.
We are preparing to increase our electricity exports to consumers in the European Union. Despite the war, we secured the connection of the Ukrainian power grid to the entire European energy system in a record time. Our exports allow us not only to generate foreign currency revenues, but also help our partners withstand Russian energy pressure. We will gradually make Ukraine one of the guaranteeing parties to the European energy security, thanks to our domestic production of electricity. About the Antonivsky Bridge in Kherson and other river crossings in the region, of course, they will all be rebuilt, but by us. We are doing everything to ensure that the occupying forces do not have any logistical opportunities on our land. Whatever plans they have, we will break them. And we will liberate our territory with military, diplomatic, and all other available means until we reach the legal borders of Ukraine.
The White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby says the United States has made, quote, a substantial offer to Russia to release U.S. citizens detained there. Washington has reportedly offered Moscow a deal to bring home WNBA star Brittany Griner and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan weeks ago, but Mr. Kirby declined to give details of the deal. Washington was willing to exchange a Russian arms dealer Victor Bout, who is serving a 25-year prison sentence in the United States, as part of a deal to secure the release of the two Americans. A Russian lawyer for Mr. Whelan had previously said he believed Moscow wanted Bout to be part of a prisoner swap for Whelan.
Now, months ago, President Biden directed his national security team to pursue every avenue to bring Brittany home safely to her family, her friends, her loved ones, her teammates. The U.S. government continues to work aggressively, pursuing every avenue to make that happen. Now, as part of those efforts, we made a substantial offer to secure the release of Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner and to bring them home, just as Secretary Blinken mentioned earlier. That a high-level administration official, Deputy Homeland Security Advisor Josh Geltzer, spoke today reached out, today to both the Whelan and Griner families ahead of Secretary Blinken's comments, and he's going to be having conversations with them later today and tomorrow. In order to decrease the chances for success here, we're obviously not going to be able to share more publicly about the deal. I'm sure you all have questions about what this looks like, and I'm sure you can all understand that it's not going to help us get them home if we're negotiating in public with y'all. So I'm not going to have any more detail on that. I think we're making it clear across the national security team that we're serious about securing their release. I don't have any conversations to speak about or announce on the president's behalf. We believe that this is a serious proposal, and we want the Russians to take it seriously as well. That we felt that where we are, and given the circumstances, certainly in part in context to Mrs. Griner having to stand and testify today, that it was an appropriate time to talk about these efforts. That the president and his team are willing to take extraordinary steps to bring our people home, as we've demonstrated with Trevor Reed. And that's what we're doing right here. It's actively happening now. This has been at the top of the mind for the president and for his whole national security team. He receives regular updates about the status of our negotiations to secure Brittany and Paul's release, as well as other U.S. nationals who are wrongfully detained or held hostage in Russia, and I might add, around the world as well.
Speaking earlier at another news conference, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had said that he hoped to advance the process of bringing home U.S. citizens detained in Russia when he speaks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He, however, declined to say what the United States was offering in return.
There is absolutely no legitimacy. I've been threatened. My personal safety.
In the coming days, I expect to speak with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov for the first time since the war began. I plan to raise an issue that's a top priority for us: the release of Americans Paul Whelan and Brittany Griner, who've been wrongfully detained and must be allowed to come home. We put a substantial proposal on the table weeks ago to facilitate their release. Our governments have communicated repeatedly and directly on that proposal. And I'll use the conversation to follow up personally and, I hope, move us toward a resolution. This is something we are working every single day. And most of the time we're working it quietly behind the scenes for obvious reasons. And I would say, just because you don't see us doing something or you don't hear us talking about it doesn't mean it's not happening. On the contrary, this is something that bringing people home, bringing Brittany home, bringing Paul home, this is something that we're focused on 24/7, 7 days a week.
Let's speak to Nigeria's former envoy in Ukraine, Ambassador Frank Isso, joins us from our Abuja studios. Good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you once again for your time this morning.
Good morning, Larry. A pleasure to be here.
Why should the Russians agree to this deal? The Americans have put it on the table for about a month now, and the Russians have not responded at all. It does appear as if it's the Americans who are now pushing for this, because the Russians don't seem to want to talk about it, possibly because they want it as part of a broader discussion, not just a prisoner swap, which is straight. Could you possibly look at it and come up with any reason why the Russians should follow through on this deal?
Well, for a very long time, America and Russia have been at loggerheads. That's understandable, given the crisis at hand. And for a very long time, high-ranking officials of both countries have not sat down at any table to discuss any issues, nor have there been telephone discussions. So there's an opportunity, for them to meet and see how they can iron out certain differences they have. Or like you observed, the Russians might not be too moved by the offer being given by the Americans, because they might be looking for something broader, and something broader might be in the sense of getting America to slow down its support for Ukraine. And I don't think the Americans will do this. And the Americans on their part are under pressure, by the American people to find a way to bring back these two individuals home. And they keep pressing, but how to get the Russians to play ball is going to be very difficult, since they have diametrically opposed reason to want to hold discussions with the Americans. So it's likely to take a while, before they will allow that to happen. The Russian citizen has been in jail in the US for quite a long time. And I think the Russians might very well like to have the situation continue that way and use these Americans in Russian jails, as pawns in any future discussion with the Americans. But for now, I think they want to play hardball and get as much mileage as they can from this episode.
As a senior and veteran diplomat, is it helpful when two sides have this kind of situation where for quite a while, as you pointed out, they weren't talking at all to each other at any level? Even the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, referenced that the national security spokesperson also said so, that there hadn't been any discussions since the Russian invasion. And then now there is this, as you put it, pressure to bring home Americans in Russia. How much of a strategic error do you think it is in diplomatic relations for two sides that have so much in common and so much to discuss not to talk to each other when a crisis breaks out?
Well, it depends on the depth of acrimony, between the two of them. And if you look at how the Ukrainian crisis evolved, that acrimony was there, from the outset. And no side was ready to give an inch, in their position. So naturally, the best thing would be, to just stay apart from each other. But little did they know that at a point in time, an issue will arise that will require them to talk to each other. I'm sure the American would have wished this kind of situation doesn't exist and would have wanted to continue along the line they've been playing this game with Russia for quite a while now. But I think given the pressure from the American citizens back home, they find themselves in a difficult position. And being a very clear democracy, they will want to hack into the ears of their people. And that's why, they are making all the frantic efforts now, to see how they can discuss with the Russians. America being a very free society, it's difficult, to get their citizens, to abide by certain rules. They do not conform to the rules of their host territory. So even if they have these people released now, there's no saying, you won't have some Americans, crossing the line, as it were, in Russia in future, and may become pawn again, for the Russians, in this their game of political brinkmanship.
Let us speak about something else that probably you would find quite interesting. This week, the French president has been visiting Africa. So has the Russian foreign minister. The Russian foreign minister, of course, has been visiting the top of Africa, if you like, countries like Ethiopia, talking about Egypt and so on. And the French president was in neighboring Cameroon, and he's built to go to, I believe he's going to Guinea and Benin Republic after that, if he's already there. I'm wondering, are these two sides of it both courting Africa at this point? The French want guaranteed energy supplies and they want to support new markets for their businesses. The Russians are here to ensure that Africa remains a client state in terms of grain and wheat supplies. But what does Africa get out of this?
Well, if you notice in the past 1 year or so, French diplomacy has sort of been losing ground in Africa. Let's take the case of Mali, where they found themselves booted out, from influence, in that country. And it's not telling very good, for French policies. If there's any colonial power or erstwhile colonial power that still has strong attachment to Africa, it is France. And this has been able to maintain for a very, very long time. So the event in Mali, must have come out as a shock, and there is need to stem that tide to ensure that other countries don't follow suit in trying to sever relations one way or the other with the mother country, as it were. So I see this trip, by Macron in that light. And like you referenced to, perhaps to see how it can secure bigger markets for its products and maybe create a inward market for it, in terms of energy and all that. As for Russia, beyond grain and weapons, I think Russia has another thing on her mind. That is to see how it can stem the situation of isolation it has found itself since the Ukrainian war started. With the entire Western world, as it were, against her, the only way it can maintain some element of friendship, so to speak, is to try and cut countries that are supposedly neutral in this crisis, as it were. But like I said when I was here a few months ago, there was a fundamental mistake Russia made. That is in the build-up to the vote on whether to suspend her or not from the Human Rights Council. It came out with a statement that sounded like a threat to everybody, that any country that voted in favor of that resolution will be seen as an enemy of Russia, and that even if any country abstained from voting, it will still be seen in that light. And I had commented then that it wasn't proper in international relations to make that kind of statement, because you need as many friends as you can hold on to. And by doing that, certainly was finding ourselves, alienated from countries in Africa. Now, the foreign minister is visiting countries like Egypt, Uganda, Ethiopia, Congo Republic. These countries abstained then. So by visiting them now, it now means that they are going back on their words. And they discover that the isolation they put themselves in is not paying them handsomely the way they had expected. So I believe, in addition to seeking market for their grains and weapons, and those are the only two things they really have to sell to Africa anyway, they really need to appear to be the friends of Africa. And they've been hammering on this for quite a while, given the impression that since they never colonized Africa, Africa should see them as their real friend. That is the way I look at these two trips, coming at the same time. And if you recall too, the loss of France in Mali was the gain of Russia.
Indeed. But I want to ask Ambassador about what do these African countries get out of it? It's obvious from what you've said now that France has what it is expecting, what it wants. Russia has what it is expecting, what it wants. But in this kind of, I don't know if we can call it a negotiation, the other party, in this case Africa, ought to also put some things on the table that it wants. But that doesn't seem to be the case. That's one. One of my guests yesterday pointed out that one would have expected either at the level of ECOWAS or AU or one of the other regional bodies for there to have been an emergency meeting so that the African countries could take some kind of common position to this expected overtures so that they don't get picked up one by one, and then you have bilateral deals between France and those countries, or Russia and those countries, or indeed other outsiders and those countries. But that doesn't seem to be happening.
I recall too at one of our earlier meetings that I had said that Africa doesn't have a common policy with respect to this Ukrainian crisis. And there cannot be one, because all countries have varying policies towards these two countries. And the situation still holds. Now, the countries Russia, for instance, has picked are countries, one way or the other, that had some relations with in the past. And if you look at those countries, none of them can pass for a democracy. So this kind of trip, rather than benefiting the people of those countries, might well be just benefit, for the leaders themselves. Take Egypt, Uganda, Congo, they are all run by dictators. Even Ethiopia, the gentleman who started very well as a Democrat, has seemingly slipped into that tunnel of dictatorship, the way it's seen by so many countries. So actually, I don't see much coming out of that trip for Africa. Because to start with, there isn't much coming from Russia to Africa. So there's nothing I see, that can come out of this trip beyond just the photo op that we're seeing at this point in time. Now, Africa cannot come together on this issue because there's no single policy guiding the continent with respect to the crisis in Ukraine. As for France, well, France naturally, has this endearment, towards her former colonies. So I think that's what is happening at this point in time. And if you look at it very well, the trips do not involve English-speaking countries for now.
Indeed.
But I think it's more like, yes, it is more like trying to hold on to its former possessions, given what happened in Mali. That's the way it's turning out to be.
Very grim, gloomy predictions there, Ambassador. Thank you so much for your perspective this morning. Ambassador Frank is a former Nigerian envoy to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
After the break, Ukraine is to seek war crimes charges against Western banks aiding Russia. Join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the world is waiting to see if Russia follows through on its grain deal with Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine signed the deal last week, brokered by Turkey and the United Nations, to reopen grain and fertilizer exports that have been blocked by war to ease an international food crisis.
There's a difference between a deal on paper and a deal in practice. Hundreds of millions of people around the world are waiting for these ships to set forth from Ukraine's ports and for millions of tons of grain and other crops to reach world markets. The Kremlin signed this deal to look reasonable to the world. Without any intention of following through, we'll know that soon enough. In the case of grain specifically, what we need to see, what we're looking to, but what the world is looking to, more important is whether those ships begin to sail, whether the grain starts to move. We'll find out in the next few days. The only way that Russia can fully address the concerns of the world, look, the ideal way would be for it to stop the war, end the aggression. But short of that, end the blockade, there's a deal on the table to do that. What's going to be much more important than what Foreign Minister Lavrov says on his travels is what Russia actually does in implementing the agreement. That's what the world is looking for. As we look ahead, what the world has heard recently from Russia's leaders is raising new alarms. Last week, Foreign Minister Lavrov said that the Kremlin's goals in Ukraine had expanded. Now they seek to claim more of Ukrainian territory beyond the Donbass. This is the latest in a series of evolving justifications and ever-shifting goals. What this is about, and has always been about, is President Putin's conviction that Ukraine is not an independent state and belongs to Russia. He said it flat out to President Bush in 2008, and I quote, "Ukraine isn't a real country," end quote. He said it in 2020, and I quote, "Ukrainians and Russians are one and the same people."
Meanwhile, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar says the country has inaugurated the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul to monitor the implementation of the grain shipment process from Ukraine. Located inside the big compound of a military university in the city's European side district of Besiktas, the center consists of 20 representatives from Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations, 5 from each party. Mr. Akar said at the launching ceremony of the Coordination Center that the current main task is to safely and quickly transport more than 20 million tons of grain stranded in Ukrainian ports to countries of need. Frederick Kearney, an interim coordinator for the UN to the Joint Coordination Center, said in an interview that a safety concern is the top priority for those who are working at the Coordination Center.
The primary consideration in this initiative is to ensure the safety and safe navigation of merchant vessels. So, of course, all of those considerations will be taken into account. We believe that it's critical to ensuring global food security. So, yes, we need to succeed.
Military technical cooperation will be on the agenda when Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan meet in Sochi. This was the response by Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov when asked about Mr. Erdogan's revelation that Moscow had an eye on Turkey's Bayraktar combat drones, which are currently supplied to Ukraine. Earlier, Mr. Erdogan had told his party leadership about Mr. Putin's interest in Turkey's military drone industry. The Russian leader reportedly raised the subject of cooperation with Bakhtar Makina, the makers of Bayraktar, at the July 19 meeting in Tehran, but Mr. Peskov did not offer specifics when asked about it. Mr. Erdogan is scheduled to meet Mr. Putin on August the 5th. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has presented Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky with the Sir Winston Churchill Leadership Award, drawing comparisons between the two leaders in times of crisis. The award was presented for what Mr. Johnson's Downing Street office described as incredible courage, defiance, and dignity in the face of Russia's invasion. Accepting the award via video link from Kyiv, President Zelensky quoted wartime British Premier Churchill as saying that Johnson had not thought of quitting the struggle when the going got tough.
Dear friend Boris, esteemed members of the Churchill Society, dear Ukrainian participants of the Warrior Games, I know you are there as well as dear guests. This is an incredible honor to receive this leadership award today, and while I am receiving it, it feels fit to repeat some of the most famous words said by Winston Churchill, which he pronounced on the 8th of May 1945 after the end of World War II in Europe. My dear friends, this is your hour. This is not victory of a party or of any class. It's a victory of the great British nation as a whole. Same as 80 years ago, the factor of personal political leadership has decisive impact. Leadership on the battlefield, leadership in assisting an army which is fighting, leadership in international relations. And while what's at stake in this war is not quite the same, the stakes are high, as they were 80 years ago.
Ставка в цій війні інша, вона не менш висока, ніж 80 років.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has also congratulated citizens on the day of Ukrainian statehood, the first time the holiday has been marked since being proposed in 2021. Mr. Zelensky introduced the national day during Independence Day celebrations in 2021 when he said the country was introducing the day of Ukrainian statehood and considers it the starting point to be the year of the founding of Kyiv. In a video address posted to Telegram, Mr. Zelensky asked Ukrainians not to give up fighting for their sovereignty. Let's talk now to senior fellow at the Forum of Trans-Regional Studies, Victoria Seredia, who joins us virtually from Berlin in Germany. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
Let's start off with this issue of the grain deal and all the things that have come out from it since then. Do you think that this deal will go ahead in spite of so many hiccups and so much pessimism?
Everybody very much hopes so, but what we've seen as soon as this deal was signed, the very same day, there were missiles hitting Odessa port, which is one of three which should be used for grain shipping. And there were a lot of worries that this will stop this deal, and there were discussions that actually this is how Russia behaves quite often, that they are signing certain deals and then they didn't recognize those deals. So there were a lot of worries that this will be again the case. And what immediately happened, even if this deal will be working in the future, it again raises the prices of food, because any crisis with this deal immediately influences markets and markets of grain. So I think this is very important to keep working steadily, and it will take some technical time as well, because Ukrainian side needs to demine ports before they can ship the grain and make sure that this vessels can go without any difficulties. And this is important, that in between nothing will be interrupted, no rocket hits will be again on the Ukrainian territory nearby those 3 designated ports. Why these ports are important? Because these big vessels, which can take 7 times more grain than those which can float through the Danube River. Well, Ukraine can ship the grain through the Danube River via the passage to Romania and Bulgaria, but it will take much longer time. So if this grain needs to be shipped as soon as possible to put some certain relief, then of course all conditions had to be preserved and carefully followed.
2 of Ukraine's staunchest allies since this began in February, Britain and the United States. First, Britain, where you have Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is on his way out, awarding the Churchill Leadership Award to Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, more like a parting gift. Are you worried that perhaps the incoming leader in the United Kingdom might not be as front and center in support of Ukraine, especially given the economic problems that the United Kingdom itself now faces?
A little bit, maybe, yes, but I just recently discussed this issue with my colleagues in Britain, and they all said that in reality, the politics won't radically change. So maybe some minor changes might be in place, but nothing will radically change in support of Ukraine so far.
Then in the case of the United States, for the first time since this war, this invasion started in February, the U.S. is seeking to talk to Russia on a prisoner swap, getting 2 of its citizens out and releasing arms dealer Victor Bout to Russia. Do you perhaps think that this may be the first sign that if they are talking, there might be some kind of passageway to some kind of peace talks that would then eventually involve Ukraine and Russia?
Today, greeting the citizens of Ukraine with new holiday, Zelensky said that actually Ukraine is seeking a peace, and it's seeking a peace by every possible means, including not only military but diplomatic. Of course, taking into account the official borders of the country. But I guess it's extremely important to have different platforms where the issue will be discussed, and maybe it will create possibilities for also some diplomatic solutions, like the one we have, a very small step, but in Istanbul with grain shipping.
When you last appeared on this program, I asked you about home, because you are in Berlin, Germany, but I asked you about home and what you're hearing and how you're settling in. Let me again update us on that situation. Is it any better from what you're hearing at home? We hear about attacks, but the situation on the ground perhaps is not quite as dramatic.
Again, it depends on the place where you are located, but now much more locations recently were hit by Russian missiles, including again north of Ukraine, some central Ukrainian parts, and of course the south and eastern parts of Ukraine are under constant attacks with Russian missiles. And just recently, today, there was released a sociological survey of people who left the country and staying as refugees abroad. So 90% of them claimed that they want to return to the country back. but almost half of them said that they won't return until situation will be more or less safe. So this new wave of attacks with missile attacks creates a situation where people have to stay longer outside of the country and playing their lives there. Quite soon in August, the new school year will start, for example, in Germany. So a lot of people have to think what to do with kids, whether they should start their school year in Germany and try to adapt to local schools and so on.
When I asked you the last time how you're settling in, because this was some kind of change for you, you did point out then that quite a number of Ukrainians are familiar with Germany, so it isn't as dramatic or as profound a change as you would expect if you were going to a completely unfamiliar new country. But what you said last now about the new school year and the coming winter and all of that, do you see, for some reason that you've already said, some level of settling down in some of these countries that Ukrainians have been forced to go to and accepting that they may not be able to go back home for some time?
Yes, that's true. We had a survey first conducted in March, and then 40% of people who were here in Germany, absolute majority actually, were saying that as soon as possible they will be leaving, as soon as situation will be at least more or less normal. Now we have only 10% of people who say that they would leave immediately. We have 50% undecided because they don't know what is the situation like and what it will be. It's very unpredictable, but 40% already saying that they would stay a year or a bit longer, which means that this process of integration into the society already started. Some of them already found some jobs, and a school year is ahead. And it's a big question because almost every day we hear from news that another school or university was shelled, or same as with medical facilities. So if situation is even more or less peaceful, if you don't have schools, or schools are turned into shelters for the internally displaced people, your kids cannot get a proper schooling, and many people would start thinking that maybe it's better to stay at least another year or half a year in the countries where they are. And in this way, they can ensure proper schooling and proper medical access to elderly who are also with them.
Indeed, indeed. Victoria Sirelia, Senior Fellow, Forum of Transregional Studies, joining us virtually from Berlin in Germany. Thank you for your time this morning, and do continue to stay safe. We hope this crisis comes to an end soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
The economic advisor to Ukraine's President Oleg Ustenko says bosses at Western banks such as JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and HSBC are committing war crimes by continuing to indirectly finance the Russian state. Mr. Ustenko announced that Kyiv continues to gather data on banks it believes are financing traders of Russian oil and plans to forward its complaints to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. He says, though, that Kyiv will not pursue the banks themselves, but their leaders and managers. Ustenko had previously called on the bosses of several major Western banks to cut ties with companies that trade Russian oil and sell all their shares in Russian oil and gas firms such as Rosneft and Gazprom. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says Spain has the capacity to become a gas hub for Europe to help support regional efforts to curb dependence on Russian gas. He was speaking at a news conference with his Polish counterpart Maciej Morawiecki in Warsaw, Poland. Mr. Sanchez says Spain would do what it could to prevent Europe from becoming an energy hostage of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Polish Prime Minister added that Russia could not be trusted to honor an agreement to allow the export of Ukrainian grain from Odessa. This week, energy ministers agreed in Brussels that all EU countries should voluntarily reduce gas use by 15% in a bid to save up supplies for the winter. Let's take another break, and when we come back, we'll be taking a bit of an analysis on some of the other developments concerning the war in Ukraine, particularly in business. And then we'll have sports. Plus, World Chess Olympiad begins without Russia. Join us again. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned. As promised, here is Ini John Makwa.
Good morning. Good morning.
Bitcoin. And you notice the way I said it, Bitcoin, because quite a lot of people have heard us talk about Bitcoin, and most of the time recently is not pleasant news.
It's not.
But this time it's different.
Yes, it is. The Federal Reserve hikes its rates. Of course, we've been talking about all countries except Russia hiking rates.
Right.
Of course, they hiked theirs yesterday by 75 basis points. And it just fell within what was expected. So because of that, we had a lot of positive reactions from Bitcoin. Bitcoin went up to 23,000 yesterday. We haven't had that in a very long time in the midst of all of this. And then we also had the markets, the equities reacting, the DAX, the NASDAQ, and all of them went up yesterday. And it's all because, well, some people were saying they were going to hike up to 100 basis points, but because they did 75, so it's like it was already priced in, no surprises. And then Jerome Powell also did say that they might start tapering on that hike. So it's not like our CBN governor who said as long as inflation keeps going up, that
the rates too will follow.
The rates too will follow. They are saying that, I mean, they've noticed that there's beginning to be a slowdown in production. So making, for instance, mortgage rates more expensive, credit card rates are more expensive now every time there's a hike in the rate. So because of that, it's discouraging demand, and of course it's discouraging manufacturing and all of that. So that should actually reduce inflation, and they're promising, of course it's not a very strong promise because whatever happens, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, you know, they're promising that they might not be as aggressive as they have been in hiking rates. So that's why we saw Bitcoin went to 23, came tapered to this 22 it is this morning, and then the stock market also went up, and it seems investors are kind of happy and sighing a sigh of relief at this time.
How long that will remain the
You just took that off. You took that off my lips.
Absolutely. Now, Germany is thinking about delaying the shutdown of the country's last 3 nuclear plants. Yeah. This is related, of course, to this gas.
Yes, it is. You know. I think they had a plan. Remember the Fukushima accident, the Chernobyl.
They wanted to phase out.
Yes. So it might not come as soon as they wanted it to, because obviously with Russia helping them to cut off the gas earlier than they thought it would be, they have to fall back on something. Already they have their emergency plan on. I think they're in stage 2
now.
Yes, and telling people to cut down on their consumption of power. Winter is there, production is going down, and so it doesn't look like they can actually just cut off this nuclear plant's production from it, and the, well, unintended risks that
come with, of course, operating and maintaining nuclear plants. The cabinet in Ukraine is lifting a ban on the export of rye and mineral fertilizers.
Yes. So you remember we talked about food protectionism the other time. So obviously Ukraine was doing it. So apart from the fact that the export routes
were all blocked.
Exactly. They stopped all of that because rye they send to these other countries is a grain also that they also, some people use it for bread, so it can even serve as wheat, substitute for wheat. Exactly. So they had to stop the exports to be able to cater for the demands locally. But now they need
money. And then of course under this deal, if this deal goes ahead for grain, the same route could possibly be used
and then
for rye
some components of fertilizer also is also supposed to go through the same route also. So, I mean, a lot is really hinging on that
on
deal.
This grain deal.
A whole lot. I think I saw some reports where India was asked to go and talk to Russia. Turkey have been asked, please go and talk to Russia. Let them straighten out the terms and condition of this, and let the world have a little bit of
relief and get and all those people who have since dropped below the poverty line, feeding, very important.
Very, very important. All those food insecure. Yesterday we talked about Lebanese. Yes. 22% of them are already food insecure, and things are changing every day. So
and more people are getting affected. The longer all of this takes, the more people will be affected.
Yes.
Thank you, Ini. Of course, there'll be more of this to unpack later on our business shows, Business Morning right after this. And Business Incorporated. Ini and Laddie Williams will be on top of the game in all of that. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Russian gamer Ivan Pure Moskalenko, who was caught up in a scandal for drawing a Z symbol at a competition earlier this year, has been denied a U.S. visa and will miss a major upcoming Dota 2 tournament. That's according to a teammate of his. The Belarusian gamer Dmitry Polichuk, who is part of the NTT esports team, alongside Moskalenko, announced the news on his Telegram channel. Polichuk said he had been granted a one-year visa ahead of the PGL Arlington Major 2022 tournament, which gets underway on August the 4th. A rout broke out after Moskalenko drew the Z symbol on a mini-map during a brief pause in the action when taking on opponents' mind games, which consists of Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian players in a Dota Pro Circuit Eastern European qualifying event. The Z sign has been used by the Russian military during its campaign in Ukraine and is seen as an unofficial show of support among some of the population back home. The Norwegian city of Sandefjord has been withdrawn from staging this year's International Gymnastics Federation Congress due to a refusal to host delegates from Russia and Belarus. Sandefjord had been due to hold the FIG Congress in October, but the FIG announced that it would seek to find an alternative location due to Russian and Belarusian officials and delegates being blocked from attending events in Norway. The FIG had initially allowed Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete as neutrals following the invasion of Ukraine before implementing a ban on their participation in March. Russian gymnast Ivan Kolyak was banned for 1 year for wearing the letter Z on his singlet, a symbol widely regarded to be a signal of support for military action and displayed on tanks during the invasion of Ukraine. A record number of nations are set to compete at the long-awaited 44th edition of the International Chess Federation Olympiad in Chennai in India today. A total of 185 countries have registered to participate in the event, with 186 teams entering the open session and 156 in the women's competition. Russian capital Moscow had been chosen to stage this year's event, only to be stripped of the hosting rights following a Federate's ruling to stop all tournaments from taking place in Russia. There will also be no Russian or Belarusian teams at the Chess Olympiad after they were banned in response to the war in Ukraine. Finally, on the show, we have rarely seen them together since the war in Ukraine started. But a recent interview by British broadcaster Piers Morgan on his show Uncensored gives us a look into the lives of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife, the First Lady Olena Zelenska. In the light-hearted conversation, Ms. Zelensky revealed that she found out her husband would be running for president on TV. The couple laughed while recounting how he forgot to tell Olena he put himself forward for the top job and that she found out during a TV address on New Year's Eve.
There's already a campaign to have Boris Johnson back as Prime Minister. Would you say much?
I believe this would be a great signal, a big signal. Everyone sees Ukraine's attitude towards the US. This would be the highest support. And we had huge support from the side of the First Lady. She met with Olena here, and it was the correct visit. Very, I would say, unexpected. I would say we were waiting for it a lot, but we didn't expect it to happen. There are very important things. Then the trip. Olena will not say it for herself. I can say it. That was a very important moment. She did a great job. And her efforts really worked. There are quick decisions from the Congress and the White House that emerged after her speech and her visit. And these are very important things. And of course, the visit of President Biden to Ukraine would be the strongest signal which can be given in support of Ukraine.
And that's how we wrap up our show this morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akeredoluale. There's an update in the world today at 5 o'clock. Good morning.